In life, sometimes you have to have hard conversations. On today's show, we're going to talk about what do you do? How do you make sure that you get to the best possible outcome? Stick around. Your mind is a beautiful thing, but if left unattended, it can get ugly real quick. If you're not constantly curating the content your mind consumes on a daily basis, then your surroundings will dictate your daily thoughts, habits, behaviors, and actions. This show has only one goal: to leave your mind more beautiful than it was when you arrived. Welcome to the Beautiful Mind Show. Hey, welcome to the Beautiful Mind Show. My name is Jason Everett, and I'm beyond excited to be here today hanging out with you. And today's special guest, just kidding, there's not a special guest today, is actually just me. I'm rocking with it solo today. And I want to have a really good conversation with you today about what it means to have a hard conversation. If you've ever had to have a hard conversation, do me a favor and say hard in the comment section below, or just yell at whatever device you're listening to this on, and just say hard. Say it's hard. I had to have a couple of really hard conversations lately, and I want to talk about this, man. Whether it's a family member or a coworker or your spouse or your children, hard conversations are something that can literally make or break you. And so I'm going to ask you, what have been some hard conversations you've had to have? What have been some environments? Just think of it like in your own mind for a second as you're either listening to this or sitting and watching this. What have been some difficult conversations you've had to have? You know, I've often heard that life can change in the matter of a sentence. Never again. Would you marry me? I'm done. This is finished. You're hired or you're fired, right? Life in an instant can present you with some very interesting conversations. And if you've ever had some really hard or difficult conversations, do me a favor and say hard in the comment section, so I know that this is going to be good, valuable information for you. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is actually inside our academy, our training program, we're getting ready to do a training called The Art of Conversations. I'm really grateful that we talked about that's going to be talking about all the different types of conversations you can have, including the hard ones. But I want to just focus right now, today, in Beautiful Minds, on hard conversations, because I'm going to be really honest. I've had conversations that have given me headaches for weeks. I've had conversations that made me cry at the end of those conversations. Tears of joy sometimes, and also tears of pain sometimes. And I want to talk about some hard conversations people had to have with me. I want to talk about both sides of it. I will never forget the first time I was fired. If you've ever been fired, do me a favor and say I have. If you're willing to admit it. By the way, it takes a lot to talk about the times you were fired. I always think it's entertaining that I've been fired before. And it's like, you talk about that and you're like, wow, what was it? Well, here's the thing. I had a job where I worked for a company for a long time. My manager moved on and the new boss came in. I knew he didn't like me from the very get, and we tried to work it out for like a month. And at the end of the month, it was like, this isn't working. And he straight up said, this isn't working for me. I don't think it's working for you. You're fired. And honestly, it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do was hear somebody say that to me. And I've had to say that to a lot of people over the years, like literally dozens and dozens of people over the last, 20 years of employing people through different companies, some in good ways and some in bad. And I've parted ways with lots of different people. But I think that's a really hard conversation to have. And I want to frame up for you today as a part of Beautiful Minds. How do you prepare yourself to walk into conversations like that? If you want to be better prepared, do me a favor and comment prepare in the comments. And this whole idea of being better prepared is you got to get yourself in the right frame of mind. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of people panic because they try to script out conversations and they try to write things down. I know that for me, when I feel a lot of pressure or there's a lot going on, I try and write it out, or I think through, or I talk it through with lots of different people. And that can be good and bad, but sometimes what happens is it builds up the pressure on that conversation. So where does the pressure come from in the first place? Well, here's what I think. I think for a lot of people, the pressure comes from them wanting to have the conversation go one way, but them not being able to control the outcome. And if you're a control freak like me, Yes, I'm a control freak. Do me a favor and say control or mass control. Say mass control in the comments. If you're a control freak like me, what I think stresses me out the most about having a hard conversation is I can't control the outcome. Right? Like in general, I think that's what causes stress. You work with somebody like, hey, I can't control what they're doing, or I can't control if it's going to go good or bad. I'm not really sure. So I'm walking into an unknown of a bad conversation. So let's say this. What about a hard conversation with your spouse? When you're talking about, what's going on in your life and something's not going the way that you want it to go. I was thinking back to like when the principal at the school needs to call home to tell a parent about their kids doing something that they don't approve of, that they're in trouble for, right? That's a hard conversation. And I want you to hear that in every conversation, I want to give you these notes, and this is hopefully going to write this down, and maybe you've heard me say this, but if you haven't, this should be new stuff for you, is in every conversation, there's what was said, there's what was meant, and what was heard. I'll say it again. There's what was said, what was meant, and what was heard. Thanks, Sonia, for the comment, by the way. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You can only be in control of yourself. And that's true, right? But you can also try and figure out, all right, well, how do I make sure this conversation can get to the best possible outcome? And if in every conversation there's what was said, what was meant, and what was heard, well, that means that you got to be careful about what can get interpreted. The words that you use can be important. And you can get really focused and obsessive about how to have this conversation. But I want to give you something that I think has helped me over and over again when I've had to be the one having the hard conversation, whether it's an employee review meeting or it's and whether they're going to get a raise or not get a raise or something like that. And it's called intention-based communication. If that's a new thing for you, do me a favor and say intention in the chat, is intention-based conversations. So instead of, and by the way, I want you to notice it's intention-based, not even necessarily what would be considered outcome-based conversations. So here's what I mean by that. Intention-based conversation. I'm going into a conversation with the intention of being able to come to the best possible outcome for all parties involved. My intention in this conversation is to make sure that my wife or my spouse or my whatever, the intention of this conversation is to make sure that my spouse feels completely supported, even though I have to bring up something that can be pretty heavy topic. The intention of talking with my children and correcting them is to make sure that they remain safe because they understand when they're breaking a safety boundary, right? What's the intention as opposed to what's the outcome? Because see, here's what I think people get hung up on. They get hung up in what's the outcome that I want? Well, what's the outcome I want? I want my spouse to change their behavior. I want my children to never resist my instructions again, right? I want this employee to change their behavior. I want this person to be someone they're not. And the thing that happens, this happens over and over again, is we end up in this place where we have unrealistic outcome expectations of a conversation because you can't control the outcome, but you can control your intention. So when I walk into a room and I go speak on stages, which more and more we're getting back to live events and I'm pumped about it. But even when I speak here, is that I sit and I go, I have an intention. My intention is to share with you knowledge and insights about how to have hard conversations so that when you have a hard conversation, you go, am I thinking about the outcome that I would like, or am I thinking about my intention? Because if I go into this saying, my intention is to create an amazingly valuable, really helpful podcast that people will listen to and go, man, Jason, that was really helpful for this hard conversation that I had to have. Thank you so much for sharing what you shared. And my intention is that somebody would come up to me at some point in the future and say, thank you for that. Well, then I can go wherever I want to go. But if my outcome is that people, my outcome is that, people have the 15 steps on how to do it, and I only got through 13 of them. Well, and I don't meet the outcome, then I'm disappointed. And then other people are disappointed. You're disappointed versus if my intention, it becomes like a guide, right? So for example, I'll give you this example. If I'm going to climb to the top of a mountain and my intention is to get to the top, I don't care what path I have to use to get to the top. But if my outcome is I'm going to follow that trail and I'm going to get there in an hour, I'm going to get to the top. What happens if I get off path? What happens if I'm over my hour. What happens if, and like all of a sudden that starts to create panic, and it creates pain and frustration and fear and chaos and like people getting lost, and all these things happen when you get hung up on an outcome. You see, when you're not hung up on the outcome, you ready for this? All outcomes become okay. I'll say it again. When you don't get hung up on the outcome, all outcomes become okay because your intention is focused in the right direction. And by the way, thanks Tracy for commenting. This entire idea here is that if you get really clear about the intention that you want, I want to have this great conversation, I want to leave this conversation better. I had another conversation with somebody today that I'm like, I don't know what the outcome is of this call, but my intention is to serve this person really, really well and to build a relationship with this person. So I sat down and I said, well, and by the way, this is another great thing to do. If you're having an unknown conversation that you're worried might be hard, if it's unknown, here's a really quick tip I'm going to give you that I think will help you to have better conversations. It's called pre-framing. And actually, I've got to take a quick break, but I'm going to free up for you this pre-frame and make sure that if you have a hard conversation or just a conversation you want it to go really, really well, I'm going to give you a pre-framing sentence that will make every conversation you have go really, really well. But after this short break, and if that wasn't a good teaser, I don't know what was. Come on back after this break and I will give you the very quick thing you could say at the beginning of any conversation to make sure it goes in your favor right after this short break. We are back. Would you like to have an even more beautiful mind? Well, we'd like you to have one, and we actually created a 7-day Beautiful Minds Challenge, which is a little bit of a choose your own adventure challenge for just 7 days. And I really think you can do anything for 7 days. It's definitely not easy, but it will be simple for you to get access to it. All you have to do is comment anywhere on this video or send me a message on social media that says 7-day, and I'll send you immediate access to not only our Beautiful Minds Facebook group, but also our Beautiful Minds Challenge, where you can go through 3 different areas: your mental health, your emotional health, and your physical health, and get challenges in each of those areas that'll help you get a handle on each of those areas inside your life to give you more control over what you want to do every single day. So do me a favor, comment 7-day or send me a message on any social media, and I'll make sure I give you access to our exclusive community group as well as access to the challenge. Thanks so much, and now back to the show. Welcome back. We're talking about hard conversations. Whether it's with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, with your employees, with your partner, maybe it's a business partner. Man, oh man, I've had a lot of partners over the years, and I've had hard conversation with them. I've had a hard conversation with children, with my own children, with other people's children. I've had hard conversations with friends before. Man, if you've had hard conversations, do me a favor and comment hard. That's what we're talking about today. Right before the break, I talked about what's a pre-frame that you can have in every conversation that makes, whether it's a hard conversation or just any conversation you're unsure of the outcome for, what would you do to pre-frame? Because here's the thing. I think people get stressed out when they don't know what the outcome is going to be. So how do you control that? You do it by setting the intention for what your language is going to be, what you're going to do, because there's what's said, what was meant, and what was heard in every conversation. And if you really focus on the intention, it'll get you to not what was said, not necessarily even what was heard, but what was meant. Your framework will come through. It'll be communicated through every part of your pore and of your body. Even if you screw up the words a little bit, the intention will come through. So here's the pre-frame for you. If you're ready, do me a favor and comment pre-frame. Let's do it. This is the pre-frame. When you're sitting down with somebody, and maybe it's a difficult conversation, maybe it's a neutral conversation, but this is my favorite pre-frame. Hey, here's what I'd love to get out of today's conversation. And I tell them my intention. I actually communicate my intention. I say, here's what I'd like to get out of today. I'd love for us to walk away today feeling like we're both in a better place out of our conversation. That's what I'd like to get out of our conversation today. Is there anything you would like to get out of our conversation today? And then you wait. Here's what I find very often happens. A lot of times people, if you ask them what do they want to get out of this conversation today, they're kind of in shock. They're like, well, nobody ever asked me that. We just start talking. People just throw stuff at you and just, bombard you. Because see, when people are having hard conversations, here's how it normally goes. This is gonna be a one-way conversation. I'm going to talk, you're going to listen, you're gonna sit down, shut up, and just do whatever I need you to do. Because people have built this up and it's so big, it's such a monstrous chaos for them, because they've practiced, they've rehearsed, they've talked to 15 of their friends, and they walk into this conversation and they're like, right? They've got this big expectation of how the outcome is and how they're gonna, hammer it. And by the way, here's that poor other person that like didn't have 16 weeks to prepare for this hard conversation. And you bombard them with all of this stuff that you've rehearsed and gone over and set up and in your mind. But when you sit down and you just say, here's my intention. I'd love to, and again, let's say this is your spouse, right? Here's my intention. My intention is to have a conversation that makes our relationship better, even though it might be hard to hear. That's my intention for this conversation with your kids. My intention for this conversation is to make sure that that you and daddy have a better relationship. My boys are 4 and 7, so I would call them daddy. If your kids are bigger, maybe you wouldn't call them daddy. It'd be dad or something. But the idea is if you set your intention for the conversation in the meeting, you already are plopping it right there for them to look at and go, huh, that sounds like a pretty good intention. I like that one. So the only thing you really need to frame up, instead of putting this giant monumental weight on everything that you're going to say, just say, what if I just put my intention out there? And then you truly say, what would you like to get out of today's meeting, today's conversation? What do you want to get out of today? And you know what? The people who surprise me the most, if I'm really honest, are my kids. Like, what do you want to get out today? And they'll say something like, my kids said this to me the other day, it almost wrecked my soul. I said, what do you want to get out of this conversation? And said something to the effect of, I want you to be my dad instead of my boss. Oh, talk about wrecking your soul, right? They said, you're just bossy. Kids are great, right? 4-year-olds are the best. They speak the truth. Said, you're just so bossy. You always tell us what to do. So I want you to be my dad instead of my boss. And I was like, wow, that's brutal. If that's brutal, if that would wreck your soul, do me a favor and say brutal in the chat. But it was real. I was like, well, look, all right, you don't want me to be as much of a boss. So how do I get you to listen so I don't have to ask you 10 times? And then we can have a conversation. Like, it can move us forward. And my intention is to be a better dad. So how do we do that? Then you might go, you had this conversation with a 4-year-old? Yeah, my 4 and 7-year-old, those are the kind of conversations that we want to have. But it also plays over to you with your spouse. It also plays over to you with your team. What's the intention of this review? To find out what's working, what's not working, and how do we fix this so we can have a better working relationship together? Would that be okay? Yeah, sounds great. What do you want to get out today? I want to make sure I know how I can be a better employee. Great, let's move forward. And all of a sudden, and this is important, okay? Hope is this valuable? Do me a favor, say valuable if this is helpful. Otherwise, I'm just talking to myself and it's valuable for me to put it out there, but I want to make sure it's valuable for you. Cool? Is if you don't say that up front, then everybody's working off their own agenda that hasn't been stated, okay? That's one problem. The other thing is when you say your intention out loud, you have to stop and immediately listen to what they say, because what they say after that is critical to the conversation. Because if you say, I want to improve our relationship, and they say of their how to have hard conversation, they say, I want to improve our relationship. And they say, I want to figure out how you can stop yelling at me. I don't know, maybe that's what they say. Or maybe they say, I want to figure out how whatever. They might have a misunderstanding, or you might have a misunderstanding of what's really going on. And that pre-frame conversation will give you like a warning flag. It's kind of like a shot across the bow to be like, hey, this is your chance to correct it. This is your chance to make it right. This is your chance to go down this path. And I will never forget, I was in a training one time, and somebody, we were doing an exercise. And by the way, I learned this exercise from a mentor of mine named Blair Singer. Some of you guys might know Blair Singer. Yeah. Sonia just said on here, thanks, Sonia. She said, this is super valuable. When I heard you talk with your son, I heard you listen to him, which is so important, right? And I think this is the deal, is like when you ask that question, I'll go back to my story about Blair in a second, but when you ask that question, you say, what is it you want out of today? That listen is important. And this is right in the story with Blair. As I was in a training room, and we do something called a what I feel like saying. So you say what's on your mind, and then the other person says what's on their mind. But this is important. When you're doing this is, by the way, if you don't do that as a practice in your business, it's kind of weird just out of the blue to ask your spouse, what do you feel like saying? They're like, what the hell are you talking about? So this is another way to do that without having any context for what I feel like saying. So you say, here's what I'd like to get out today. What would you like to get out today? Now, I usually state mine first because I want people to know what my intention is and where I'm coming from. But when you listen to them, this is your chance before you kind of open your mouth and state your manifesto. This is your chance to understand what way do you need to go in this conversation. So when I was in this training room, we were doing this feel like saying. This guy starts going off. He goes, what I feel like saying is you guys were a bunch of crappy idiots, didn't know what you were doing, blah, blah. And he started going off. And I put my hand on his shoulder and I just said, hey, let them go first. And so he can say like, something, but not go off on people. And we went around the rest of the room and everybody said, man, today was incredible. I changed lives. And it was very positive all the way around the room. We get back to this guy and he goes, I'm really sorry. I was in my own head. I was focused on what I was screwing up and what I was doing and where I was going wrong. And like, it completely changed what was going on because the intention of letting everybody else voice what they needed to say first, it made this guy realize that he was in his own head, that he was obsessed with himself and not paying attention to anybody else. And it completely changed the context of the conversation. And so the rest of the debrief went really differently than it would have gone had he just gone off on people first. So when I say your intention first, my intention is to have a great conversation and learn where you're coming from. Like, and it should be a mutually beneficial intention, okay? So think about this. If you say your intention, my intention is to figure out what the hell your problem is. It's not mutually beneficial intention, is it? That's like my intention is to school you on what you're doing wrong. My intention is to get you to get your shit together. Excuse my language. I don't know if I can cuss here, but I'm cussing. All right. Whatever the intention is, it should be a mutually beneficial intention coming from you. And then you'll hear whatever their intention is, and it will flag you to say, how do I want to have this conversation go? Right? How do I make sure that we're in a good spot? Let's see, another comment came up on here. Biggest challenge is getting myself out of fourth gear. As an owner, slowing down to really have communication happen with my people. Such a good comment. I am a ridiculously quick thinker. And I say that because I know that's my reality. I'm so fast that I usually have to slow myself down, even in conversation, to talk with people, because I know that sometimes I talk faster than most people listen. I also know that because I have a background in improv and sketch comedy, it trained me to think even faster. And so I run really quickly, and it is very easy to run really fast and run over people. Can I just say that? So I want to give you this little tip, and this is helpful for any conversation, is you get to learn how to be a responder over a reactor. Can I say that again? To be a responder over a reactor. They call them first responders, right? Fire department or ambulance or something like that. They're called first responders. They're not called first reactors for a reason. Reactors are people who think really quickly. Let me just react. What happened? Boom, go. Let me do this. Quick, cry. Scream, yell. Right? With your children, this is one of those things where like you yell at them because they did something wrong. You're like, hey, like that's a reaction. Responders, and here's how you become a responder over a reactor. A responder has resources at their disposal. A responder says, what's the best tool I need to put in the fire truck? What's the best tool I need to have with me in the ambulance in order to go with them? And now they don't sit and have like a whole bunch of stuff on the wall and go, will I need a fire hose at this fire? Will I need an axe with me at this fire? Will I need a fire extinguisher? Like, of course, they're going to need that stuff. They're used to putting out fires, right? So the thing is they have a set of tools that they prepare from. This tool in hard conversations, being able to pre-frame is massive. This tool, being able to focus on how do I respond versus react? How do I slow myself down? And by the way, you've probably heard this before, but you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them appropriately, right? Is you get to be a good listener. You get to say, I get it. Let me think about that. One of the things I do, because again, I usually do a very quick first response. I will say to somebody, I hear you. Let me think about that for a second. And I'll take a second to think about it. Now, do I already have a response? Probably. Am I going to use that first response? Maybe. Because the first one's a reaction. The second one might cool that down, right? You've heard this old adage on sending emails, count to 10 before you send. I don't have a clever acronym for wait 3 seconds before you give people your response in a conversation. I think that's why a lot of times today people prefer to text back and forth. Why? Because they want to do this. And by the way, I'll just say this, because if you get nothing else out of today, can I just give this one to you? No matter what generation you are, don't have a hard conversation via text message. Can I just say that? Don't quit via text. Don't divorce somebody via text. Don't tell your spouse that you need to go to counseling via text. Have a hard conversation in person. And I know it makes it even harder to do, because in your mind you're like, I'll just put this together real quick. I'll perfectly come up with all the things that I want to say in one text and send it. Don't send a, here's why we need to part ways in our partnership via email. I wanted to get my words just right. Have a face-to-face meeting with somebody to have a hard conversation. And the reason why you wouldn't is because you're afraid of what your face will say. You're afraid of what all those things will say. You're afraid you're gonna get caught off guard. So have hard conversations if you can face-to-face, if you can on the phone, if you can via video. Like don't make hard conversations something that you send over a text message. That's the coward way out, is being able to just duck out of it. But if somebody does do that, if somebody sends you, by the way, this is a response to a hard conversation. If somebody sends you something like that via text message and it's hard to get, then pick up the phone and call them as a response back. Don't get angry and text them back, right? Don't wait for your perfect text, because the text slows down the communication and allows you to have that moment to respond. But do that favor of have it face to face. And if you need to, say, I totally understand. Let me think about that for a second. Let me just take in what you just said. And then really take a second. Don't be afraid of the silence. I mean, you guys probably noticed on this tone of Beautiful Minds is a little slower than what I normally operate at, because I'm thinking more about it. I want you to catch that this is a really big deal. And when you have a hard conversation, you're going to change up your cadence. Being able to give that space. I was watching this, I was on the TikTok. I was on the TikTok and somebody said to me, or I was watching this video. They didn't say to me, it was just a video I was watching, but they said, one of the most powerful weapons you can have in any conversation is the ability to take a pause when somebody else won't. So you're like, that's a really good point. Let me think about that. And you let that pause sit for a second. Usually that will make the other person uncomfortable. I'm not saying use it like a weapon, like, all right, well, if you want to get the advantage, like just stop talking, make them uncomfortable. But what I will say is use that pause because it's powerful for you to have that pause. It creates an ability for you to think. It creates a moment for you to gather yourself. And that pause can really allow the conversation to flow better when you're not just in that mode of, let me figure out how I'm going to respond to this. Most people are formulating what they're going to say next in their head while you're talking, so that as soon as you stop talking, they're ready with the response. Take a pause, allow that space, have a hard conversation, focus on the intention rather than the outcome, and you'll have better conversations. I'd love to find out, for those of you guys that joined me, if you're on the video and you can comment with me, I'd love to find out, what was your biggest takeaway from today? What did you get out of today? What was the thing that was valuable of listening to today's podcast? And if you're a listener and you're listening to this podcast later, I just want to leave you with this final thought. Become a responder, not a reactor. Use the gift of pause. Focus on your intention rather than your outcomes. And you can have any conversation with anyone, anytime, and it will go over 1,000,000 times smoother than if you're worried about getting your way accomplished. That's when we get into fights with people. If we looked at what's happening from a political environment right now, or what we're doing with our neighbors, I think if we had hard conversations, instead of trying to be right, trying to focus on a win-win intention for both people, we could change a lot of the narrative that's happening right now, no matter what side you're on. And I think the whole problem is we're on a side. Let's not be on sides. Let's have intentions about making the world a better place to be, the world a safer place to be, and people to feel like they're being heard. Because I think that's what most people want, is they want to feel heard. So listen to people, love on each other, be amazing. And I hope that today you left with a more beautiful mind than when you started. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Thanks for joining us on today's show. If you want to get access to our 7-day Beautiful Minds Challenge, you can either comment below and just say 7-day, and I'll shoot you the information so you can get immediate access to that, or find me on any social media and just send me the message 7-day, and I'll make sure I get that out to you right away. And if you really enjoyed today's show, it would do me a huge favor if you went online, whether it was Spotify, Pandora, or iTunes, or any sort of podcast platform that you can find us on, and search for The Beautiful Mind Show, subscribe to our channel, and then make sure you give us a rating. Every time you give us a rating, it helps us get more eyeballs on our show and help more people have a more beautiful mind. Thanks again for joining us.